Welcome back to Still Unanswered. I'm Elena Marsh. Today, we're taking a long, careful look at a case that confounds, because there are so many pieces that should have fit together, but didn't. The Jamison family, Bobby, Sherilynn, and 6-year-old Madyson, who went missing on October 8, 2009, in the San Bois Mountains area of southeastern Oklahoma, and whose bodies were confirmed years later without a cause of death. It's a sad, strange story, and it refuses to tidy itself up into a simple explanation. With me is Dr. Marcus Ellery, a forensic psychologist who has worked alongside sheriff's departments and search and rescue teams in the Midwest. Marcus, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Elena. It's good to be here, and to talk about this one. It's one of those cases where the human elements are as important as the cold facts.
Yeah. Before we dig into the theories and all the internet chatter, let's lay out the facts as we understand them from official reporting. Short version: the family left their home in Eufaula on October 8, 2009. They traveled toward a 40-acre plot near Red Oak in Latimer County. Their truck was found locked on a remote dirt road on October 17th, with the family dog Maisie still inside and about $32,000 in cash under the driver's seat. And then, in November 2013, hunters found skeletal remains of 2 adults and a child roughly 3 miles from the truck. The remains were identified as Bobby, Sherilynn, and Madyson in July 2014, and the official cause of death is undetermined. That's the outline.
Right. Those are the bones of the case. And, if you'll excuse the pun, they leave a lot of flesh missing from the story. Cause of death, undetermined. No arrests. No confirmed motive. Lots of secondary rumors. That's where confusion and speculation grow.
So let's start with the family themselves. From the reporting we've got, Bobby was 44, Sherilynn 40, Madyson 6. Bobby suffered a serious car injury in 2003 and was on disability with chronic back pain, according to reports. Sherilynn struggled with depression, and there are varying accounts about diagnoses, some sources suggesting bipolar disorder, though, as always, the medical record hasn't been publicly released. They had moved to Eufaula, were looking to go more off-grid, and they'd been interested in that 40-acre parcel in the San Bois Mountains. Marcus, what stands out to you in those background details?
A few things. First, chronic pain, disability, and financial strain can be corrosive over time. The records we have show economic pressure, looking for cheaper living, the shipping container plan, so there's a practical element. Second, mental health strain in a small family can create escalating tensions. The sources mention both closeness and volatility in the couple's relationship. Those aren't mutually exclusive. When people are both dependent on each other and stressed, small triggers can cascade into larger crises.
And then there's that lawsuit against Bobby's father in November 2008. Bobby sued for unpaid wages, alleged threats, even an attempted vehicle attack, and accused his father of involvement in meth. That dispute has been a focal point for many who look for someone to blame, but law enforcement later said they did not believe the father was involved. Still, people cling to it.
Right. Familial conflict is often an easy narrative hook, but investigators tend to be guided by physical evidence, timelines, and alibis. The presence of a lawsuit and accusations paints a picture of interpersonal conflict, but it is not evidence of murder unless you can tie someone to the scene or to the timeline. It's important to separate motive from proof.
Let's walk the day itself. On October 8th, the family left their home and traveled to the land near Red Oak. There's security camera footage from earlier that day at their Eufaula property showing them repeatedly loading a white pickup in an unusual, quiet, repetitive way. Some have called it trance-like. Sherilynn appears to put a large brown briefcase into the truck at one point. That briefcase has never been recovered. They take their dog Maisie and a GPS. They meet with a land associate. That man later said he saw only the family and nothing odd at the time. Then the trail goes cold.
That CCTV footage is one of those elements that invites interpretation. People watch it and project. Drugs, spiritual surrender, fatigue, focus, whatever. From a psychological perspective, calm, silent, repetitive movement can be consistent with fatigue, medication effects, deep preoccupation, or even a kind of resigned determination. It's not diagnostic. We just don't have enough to say why they looked that way.
So the truck is found 9 days later, on October 17th. Hunters spot it on a remote dirt road near a well pad in Latimer County. It's locked. The keys are found under the driver's seat, which investigators described as odd. Wallets, IDs, cell phones, a GPS, jackets, and coats were all inside. Maisie the dog was inside, alive but very malnourished. And, this is a big one, approximately $32,000 in cash was found under the driver's seat in a bank envelope or bag. The cash, the dog, the IDs, the jackets, it suggested to at least some investigators that they intended to return, because people don't usually leave that stuff behind if they're running away. Marcus, how do law enforcement and search teams read that tableau?
They read it carefully, Elena. Leaving wallets and IDs suggests they did not plan to vanish permanently. Leaving coats in cold weather suggests they didn't intend to be exposed. The dog being inside the vehicle for days suggests sudden disappearance. But the cash complicates things. $32,000 is a lot. Investigators consider a range of explanations. Money for land purchase, proceeds from a settlement related to Bobby's accident, or, and this is where rumor steps in, possible drug money. Each idea has implications. The important thing is that none of those implications are proven by the presence of cash alone.
Yeah, and the missing items, the brown briefcase and Sherilynn's .22 pistol, add to the mystery. The briefcase could have contained documents, money, or other valuables. The gun's absence is notable because it might have been used, or taken, or carried away. But again, we don't have confirmation of how or why those items disappeared.
Exactly. Missing items invite speculation because they are what's absent from an otherwise cluttered scene. When you find a lot of personal stuff left and two specifically notable items gone, it's natural to wonder whether those items were central to motive or to what happened next.
Let's talk about the search that followed the truck discovery. More than 300 volunteers, combined law enforcement, search dogs, ground and air teams, scoured terrain that's thick and rugged. Sandsboy Mountains, steep slopes, creeks. Heavy rains followed the disappearance, which hampered scent tracking and could have eroded or moved evidence. Yet, despite those efforts, nothing definitive was found in 2009. They called off the active searches, and the case stalled. Then, 4 years later, in November 2013, 2 hunters found skeletal remains less than 3 miles from where the truck had been. How do we account for search teams' missing remains that were, on paper, not that far away?
It's frustrating, but not unprecedented. Dense brush, steep and rocky terrain, limited visibility. Search grids can be imperfect. Scavengers can move remains, heavy rains can cover tracks or shift items, and human error or gaps in coverage can leave pockets unsearched. The fact that volunteers and professionals searched extensively and still missed the spot where the remains were found is a reminder of the limitations of human search efforts in difficult topography.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The remains, discovered November 17, 2013, belonged to 2 adults and 1 child. Forensic work, including dental records and DNA, led to a formal identification on July 3, 2014, confirming the bodies were Bobby, Sherilynn, and Madyson. The Oklahoma Medical Examiner's Office listed the cause of death as undetermined, noting no obvious signs of trauma. But because the remains were skeletal, soft tissue injuries or certain types of violence couldn't be ruled out. That lack of a definitive cause has kept the case open and circulating with competing narratives. Marcus, what does an autopsy of skeletal remains typically leave investigators able or unable to conclude?
When remains are skeletal, the forensic window narrows. Bones can show healed fractures, perimortem breaks, or bullet holes, but they won't show soft tissue injuries like strangulation without associated bone damage. Toxicology is effectively impossible when the soft tissue is gone. So investigators can sometimes say whether blunt force trauma impacted bones or whether bullets traversed skulls, but they often cannot determine poisoning, suffocation, or certain types of assault. In the Jamison case, that limitation means the absence of apparent trauma is not proof of a nonviolent death.
And yet some reports circulating online mention a skull hole consistent with a bullet. The official autopsy summaries don't clearly confirm that, and it tends to show up in secondary sources or the internet's more sensational corners. That's a pattern we see a lot. A detail appears in less careful reporting and then amplifies into a claim that feels like fact.
Right, and that's dangerous for families, for investigators, for communities. Once a claim spreads, it becomes part of public expectation, and people begin judging the official record through the lens of rumor. In unsolved cases, that magnification can pull attention away from more plausible lines of inquiry.
Let's take the theories one at a time. We'll try to be fair, point to supporting evidence and the weaknesses of each. First, murder by an unknown third party, an abductor, a stranger, criminals in the woods. Evidence for it? The sudden disappearance, the remote location, and the possibility they encountered someone there. Evidence against? No obvious struggle at the truck, cash left behind, no identified suspect. Marcus, walk us through how investigators treat this possibility.
Investigators will always keep third-party foul play near the top of the list in a disappearance that ends with unidentified remains and an incomplete scene. The remote area is a setting where a confrontation could occur without witnesses. But they also look for signs, footprints, drag marks, blood, bullet casings, evidence of a forced movement from the vehicle. The truck didn't show those things, and the cash being left behind is a puzzle if a robbery motive is assumed. That said, people can be killed for reasons other than money, personal grudges, random violence, or being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Short question, Marcus. Could someone have coerced them out of the truck at gunpoint and forced them to walk into the woods?
Yes, it's possible. Coercion doesn't always leave obvious signs at the vehicle, especially if done quickly and without a struggle. Again, the skeletal state of the remains makes proving a violent confrontation harder.
Let's move to the drug theory. Some point to the trance-like CCTV behavior and to Bobby's allegations about his father's meth involvement as indicators that meth or other drugs could have been a factor, either use or dealing. The rural Midwest did have meth problems in the 2000s. Proponents of this theory say maybe they were killed over drugs or an exchange gone wrong. But investigators did not find a drug lab at their home, and no definitive evidence ties them to trafficking. Marcus, how should we weigh this?
We weigh it carefully. Behavioral oddities on camera are not proof of drug intoxication. The cash could suggest a drug transaction to some, but it could also be savings for land purchase or settlement proceeds. Without physical evidence, baggies, paraphernalia, witness testimony tying them to dealers, the drug theory is speculative. It's plausible in the environment and the time, but plausibility is not the same as a provable link.
Next theory: murder-suicide. Some people have proposed that one adult killed the others and then themselves. Supporters point to Sherilynn's reported depression and alleged bipolar disorder, missing handgun, and the family's spiritual distress. Against it, no confirmed ballistics evidence in public reports, the presence of $32,000 that wouldn't make sense if someone planned to kill themselves, and family members who argue neither parent would harm Madyson. Marcus, how do forensic and psychological perspectives evaluate this possibility?
Murder-suicide is an unfortunate reality in some family tragedies. Clinically, it occurs in contexts of hopelessness, severe depression, perceived burden, or psychosis. The missing handgun is a data point, but absence of direct ballistic evidence means it cannot be confirmed from the public record. Also, carrying a large amount of cash to a remote area seems inconsistent with a planned murder-suicide, though people's actions in crisis can be inconsistent. Overall, it remains a theory that can't be eliminated, but also lacks clear forensic support in this case.
A related, less violent possibility is accidental death, getting lost, succumbing to exposure, or suffering an injury in the woods. The discovery site was less than 3 miles from the truck. Rugged terrain, bad weather, and the presence of a child complicate survival. They left jackets in the truck, leaving them exposed if night or storm hit. The challenge: why would all 3 perish without leaving obvious signs of an attempt to return? And why were phones and GPS left behind? Marcus?
Accident and exposure is plausible. In rugged terrain, distance and foliage can make what seems like a short walk turn deadly, especially if someone is injured or disoriented. Hypothermia can impair judgment, leading to paradoxical behavior. The phones and GPS being left in the truck argue against them planning an extended outing, but mistakes happen. When a small child is involved, parental decision-making also shifts under pressure. In short, it's plausible that a chain of poor decisions, environmental conditions, and small injuries cascaded into tragedy.
Then there's the cult or occult theory, fueled by reports of spiritual warfare, satanic Bible references, and claims that the family saw spirits, a brown cat on the roof, and so on. That theory gets a lot of airtime online, but important to emphasize, there's no verified evidence of a cult connected to the Jamison case, and law enforcement hasn't endorsed it. Marcus, from your experience, why do cases like this attract occult explanations?
Humans seek meaning. When a case is emotionally charged and unexplained, people latch on to narratives that provide agency and drama. A cult, ritual, or supernatural force fits that need. The Jamisons' reported concerns about spirits make the occult angle tempting for storytelling. But without verifiable links, memberships, communication records, witnesses, it remains a cultural overlay rather than a forensic conclusion.
Another theory that recurs, that Bobby's father, Bob Dean Jamison, whose relationship with Bobby was fraught and who was accused in the lawsuit of threats and criminality, orchestrated something. Supporters cite the lawsuit and alleged threats. But again, law enforcement reportedly said they did not believe Bob Dean was involved. Marcus, this one always seems to sting because it's family against family.
It does sting. When family conflict is public, lawsuits, allegations, it draws suspicion. But investigators need corroboration. Phone records, travel logs, witness statements, or behavior placing someone near the scene. The presence of conflict raises motive, but not proof. If authorities publicly said they did not believe Bob Dean was involved, they likely had reasons, such as alibi checks or lack of forensic link, even if those reasons weren't fully disclosed to the public. Right.
We've been through the major theories. What we need to do, I think, is also call out how the media and online communities have shaped public perception. Shows like Investigation Discovery's Disappeared and BuzzFeed Unsolved brought the case to wide audiences, and podcasts and blogs further layered speculation on top of fact. The result is a swirl of mythologized detail, unconfirmed skull bullet holes, invented timelines, and repeated, unverified reports about occult practices. Marcus, how does this media amplification affect families and investigations?
Amplification can be double-edged. On the positive side, media attention can generate tips and keep cases alive. On the negative side, sensationalized or inaccurate reporting can muddy the waters, mislead potential witnesses, and re-victimize families. For investigators, separating useful leads from noise becomes harder when every rumor sprouts a dozen variations online. For families, constantly seeing their loved ones portrayed with lurid detail that isn't supported by evidence can be deeply painful.
That's an important point, the human side. The Jamisons were people, not just puzzle pieces. Some relatives described feeling a measure of closure when the remains were found, but the identification also reopened grief. A 6-year-old named Madyson was at the center of the tragedy, and that shapes how many of us react to this case. We should be careful in our descriptions.
Absolutely. We owe the family dignity. Even as we analyze evidence and theories, we have to keep the human cost in mind. Public fascination should never come at the expense of empathy.
I want to pause and underscore something practical for listeners who study cases. Unsolved doesn't always equal nefarious. Sometimes it means the forensic record is incomplete, time has eroded possibilities, and the terrain, literal and social, has obscured the trail. The Jamison case may involve foul play, a bad decision, or a combination of factors that we can only speculate about. That uncertainty is uncomfortable, and the internet fills it with stories to make it less so.
Yes, the need for narrative closure is a psychological hunger. In its place, people construct stories that feel coherent. But as professionals, we must tolerate ambiguity. Accepting uncertainty doesn't mean we stop investigating. It means we acknowledge the limits of what the evidence can tell us.
Let's go back over a few of the concrete, odd details that keep puzzlers awake at night. 1. The surveillance footage showing repetitive loading behavior. 2. $32,000 in cash left in the vehicle. 3. The locked truck with keys under the driver's seat. 4. The missing briefcase and handgun. And 5. The fact that extensive searches missed remains found a few miles away 4 years later. Each of those on its own is explainable. Together, they form a knot. Marcus, how do you mentally organize that knot when you consult on a case like this?
I map timelines, tangible evidence, and plausible behavioral patterns. For instance, surveillance behavior could be explained by stress or medication. Cash could be settlement proceeds or savings. Locked truck with keys under the seat suggests a hasty departure or an unusual decision. Missing items indicate either removal by an external actor or misplaced intent. The search gap highlights environmental difficulties. Combining those, I create several hypotheses and test for corroborating evidence for each. When the evidence is thin, hypotheses remain provisional.
Okay.
Yeah?
We've been careful to avoid inventing details or repeating weakly sourced claims. But we should also be honest. The case is a magnet for more sensational lines of thought. Cults, ritual. Those ideas sell clicks and goosebumps, but the public record doesn't support them. That's not to dismiss the family's reported spiritual fears. Pastor Gary Brandon said they spoke about seeing spirits and asked about bulletproof Bibles. But it does mean we should not leap from reported beliefs to the presence of a cult or ritual homicide without evidence. Marcus?
Belief in spiritual attack or seeing spirits is important context. It shapes behavior, decision-making, and how people explain misfortune. But belief itself is not evidence of external conspiracy. From a clinical perspective, spiritual concerns can reflect sincere religious interpretation, cultural frameworks, or symptomatic distress, all meaningful, but not equivalent to a tangible link to criminal actors.
Let me ask you directly, Marcus. Based on the facts we have in the public record, which theory do you find most plausible?
I'll answer carefully. The public record supports several plausible scenarios: accidental death in rugged terrain, third-party foul play with insufficient hard evidence to confirm specifics, or a tragic psychological crisis that escalated. Because the remains show no obvious bone trauma and the cash and personal effects were left behind, the accidental or exposure hypothesis holds weight. But because of the remote setting and the possibility of coercion, foul play also remains plausible. We don't have enough publicly available evidence to say one theory beats the others decisively.
That's a fair, sober assessment. Before we wrap, I want to spend a few minutes on what "still unanswered" means for a case like this. Officially, the case remains open as a suspicious death investigation. The Oklahoma cold cases community and occasional media pieces keep it visible. But realistically, the longer such cases go without a new lead, the harder it becomes to resolve them. What needs to happen for this case to move forward in any meaningful way?
New, verifiable information. That could be physical, a piece of evidence someone has preserved, or testimonial, a witness who comes forward with a credible memory of seeing or hearing something relevant. Advances in forensic technology can sometimes help, but with skeletal remains and degraded evidence, possibilities are limited. Ultimately, it's new leads that reignite agency in cold investigations.
Short answer. Tips. Right.
Exactly.
I also want to remind listeners that when we talk about unsolved cases, there are living people still affected, extended family, neighbors, community members. We should avoid re-victimizing language or wild accusations without evidence. If you have information, contact Latimer County authorities or the OSBI. If you're here for the puzzle, remember there's a child at the center of this story, and that should temper our fascination.
That's an important point. Curiosity is natural, but it must be balanced with compassion and responsibility.
Okay, a quick lightning round before we close. I'll name a detail, and Marcus, give one brief reaction. Ready?
Doing that.
CCTV, trance-like loading.
Multiple possible explanations. Stress, medication, focused behavior, not diagnostic.
$32,000 in the truck.
Pivotal clue. Explains motive theories, but not proof. Could be land money, settlement, or something else.
Keys under the seat.
Odd. Suggests unusual handling of the vehicle, or someone staging it afterwards.
Missing briefcase and handgun.
Potentially central items. Their absence is as telling as any presence.
Bodies found 2.73 miles away after searches.
Illustrates search limitations in rugged terrain, not an indictment of early efforts, just the reality of difficult geography.
All right. Final, more personal question, Marcus. After you've left the lab notes and timelines, what stays with you about this case?
What stays with me is the human fragility. A family trying to change their life, a child caught up in decisions none of us can fully reconstruct, and the way a community absorbs the absence of answers. The details are haunting, sure, but it's the loss and the unanswered grief that linger.
Me too. I think that's a good place to end. The Jamison family deaths are, in many ways, emblematic of unsolved cases that resist the tidy narratives we crave. There's mystery, yes, but also very real human sorrow. If you take anything from this episode, let it be that unsolved should not mean embellished. Stick to what we can verify, be kind in commentary, and if you have information, tell investigators. Marcus, thank you for joining me and for grounding this conversation in both clinical perspective and respect for the facts.
Thank you, Elena. And thank you to listeners for engaging thoughtfully with difficult material.
If you want to read more, our episode notes list official sources: the Oklahoma Medical Examiner confirmation, CBS reporting on the truck and remains, and coverage from the Seattle Times and Oklahoma cold cases. We'll also include links to some of the more comprehensive long-form pieces for context. Remember, this is an open case. If you know anything, Latimer County authorities would like to hear from you. That's it for this episode of Still Unanswered. I'm Elena Marsh. Be careful out there, and be kind to each other.